Okay, Final Four podcast. It was a record-breaking night at the 50th annual Michigan High School Hockey State Championships, and we'll get into all of the action over the weekend. Cranbrook wins Division III in dramatic fashion. Byron Center wins one for the West Side in Division II, and Detroit Catholic Central successfully defends its title in Division One. We got that and so much more on this week's episode of the podcast. So hit that subscribe button here on YouTube, follow on Apple and Spotify, and if you want to share any of your thoughts on anything we talk about on the podcast today, be sure to find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at PD's Picks, and let's talk some hockey. So, okay, I was at the Final Four for all three divisions. Missed the Division II state championship game. I'll mention that a little bit later on. But wanted to just kind of share my thoughts overall on the state finals, the state tournament as a whole, the Final Four, the stage there set at USA Hockey Arena. And one thing was very apparent to me as a coach sitting there watching these games unfold, that you are not going to compete at this level, at this stage of the tournament, much less win, if you don't defend and defend at a very high level. And I'm sure a lot of coaches are like, yeah, no shit, Petey, like rolling your eyes at me or whatever. But like, this is why, the high scoring players in high school hockey kind of get dismissed. And I don't care if you score 100 points against bad competition, because if you can't defend, if you can't back check, if you can't block shots, if you can't make plays in tight space, you can't win at the highest level of this sport. And you damn sure can't play on at the next level without some of those attributes to your game. And I think you really saw teams, players shine and show why some of those teams not only made it to the Final Four, but had success in the Final Four. And success, varying degrees. You can go to the Final Four and have great success and end up coming up short. East Grand Rapids, for instance, had a really great showing and a really strong performance by a lot of top guys. Davis Rushmore, Glenn Green, a lot of guys there jumped out to me. So that to me is where those players who might not have the stat stuffing numbers are way more valuable, way more impressive throughout the season to people like myself and others in the hockey space, where it's not everything is about the numbers, not everything is about goals, points, assists, saves, and wins, and things like that. Because ultimately, you have to play the game the right way, and not just individually, but as a team, to have success and to win championships and come away with hardware ultimately. And so as a coach, it was really awesome to see teams like East Grand Rapids, like Trenton, like Byron Center, like Brighton, like Clarkston. God, that was a great game. Have such success and be able to pinpoint, wow, the back pressure coming back after a turnover was fantastic. The defenseman closing the gap on a rush, and then you're back checking forwards, able to tie up and force turnovers and go the other way. I think that's why some other teams struggled, because the game was so condensed. It wasn't wide open space for you to get in a track meet and go up and down the ice and create offense. You really had to find ways to get creative and not make the pretty plays, but just get a puck to net and cause a scramble in front and out muscle people for loose pucks. That to me, ultimately, you can have success all season long, running and gunning and winning 6-4 and having some big individual performances. But like I said, when it comes to even at the quarterfinal level, even at some of the regional championship levels, if you're not doing some of those little things, blocking shots and back checking, to me was the biggest thing. And I know players probably don't want to hear it because they don't want to practice it. They're going to flip the switch and turn it on when they need to. if it's not a habit, if it's not an everyday thing, by this point, it's not gonna happen. And so I just think you saw some of those teams really the cream rise to the top there, and then ultimately the atmosphere as well. Let me see if I can kind of catch back up to my notes here. Um, yeah, I mean, like I said, teams that were successful this weekend back checked their asses off. Teams that were successful this weekend had amazing energy on the bench. It wasn't infighting, it wasn't bickering, and oh, why are we changing lines and this and that. Like guys were getting fired up, not just over the big open ice hits, like, oh, good hit, he took his head off. Like, no, they brought that same energy and maybe even more for the blocked shots, for the successful clear attempts on a penalty kill, the negated odd man rushes. Ultimately, you have to bring your own energy, and especially in that atmosphere, um, you have to be able to carry yourselves and get you through some of those tough times. And I thought teams like Cranbrook did a fantastic job of that. That energy on the bench and hyping each other up in house. Don't worry about what's going on outside the room. If the 20 guys in that locker room can hype themselves up and keep themselves motivated and encourage each other, that to me really separates again when you're talking about that upper crust, the top couple teams left in contention. Those are the little things that can make a huge difference at this level. Um, Teams that were successful this weekend had been on the big stage before. Um, they had played in high stress situations. They had played fast paced games. They might not have been successful. They might have lost a lot of those games throughout the regular season, but they at least had experience in playing, in fighting for pucks along the half walls against guys that were stronger than them or more skilled than them. They had been put in those scenarios before. They had played in front of 3,500 people before. East Grand Rapids, Byron Center, Trenton, uh, uh, Brighton, all teams that CC have, all teams that had been there before were a lot of those teams that also had success because they knew what to expect and knew what kind of environment they were going into on Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You know, I talked with one coach. His team was actually eliminated early on in the tournament, and you know he brought a couple of his top kids to the semifinals on Friday just so they could kind of experience that atmosphere. And I can't understate how invaluable I think that is. You know, as a coach, I know, like, I've been there. You get eliminated in the regionals or in the quarterfinals, it turns into salty season, you know, real quick, and you're bitter and you're angry, and you know sometimes you swear off the game completely. Eff it, I'm done with this. Tired of getting my heart broken. I don't want to know what happens because I'm not in it anymore. Like I get it. You just want to bury your head in the sand and ignore uh, the thoughts of what could have been. But like I'm telling you, there's so much value in going to Plymouth and watching these games, you know, potentially with a group of your younger guys, show them what it looks like, show them what it takes to get to that stage of the tournament and what that experience is like. You know, I felt for teams like Lakeland and Reese Puffer because I do think the moment was a bit too big for them. And that's unfortunate. You know, I believe both of those teams are better than what they got to show this weekend. But you know, a quick goal, a bad penalty, 100 students in the Trenton Trojan pit chanting "ugly goalie," like all of a sudden you're timid, you're hesitant, you're reacting instead of initiating, and before you know it, it's 3-0, it's 4-0, and that dream season that you just had is starting to swirl the drain a little bit. So you know, I've just seen so many one and dones over the years mount these awesome playoff runs. The entire community rallies around you, shows out for you on the biggest stage right there in USA Hockey Arena, and you just don't quite have the performance you were hoping for. And you know, you're not Brighton or Heartland or Brother Rice or Trenton, and you don't know when or if you're ever going to get another chance. So, you know, to all those coaches out there, players, teams, programs, if you are serious about having success at this level and making championship runs, think ahead, prepare for the moment. And not to say teams this year didn't. I'm just saying, trying to put that into perspective for the other 120-ish teams, that were sitting home this weekend. You want to make a state championship run, act, don't react. Schedule the toughest, meanest, ugliest games and opponents that you can find throughout the regular season. Drive 100 miles one way in a hostile environment on a Wednesday night. Take your returners to the Brighton and CC game on Saturday night there and show them what 4,500 fans watching a high school game looks like. I wasn't coaching and I damn sure wasn't playing, but I was nervous as shit watching Cranbrook EGR in triple overtime there. So I just think there's a ton of value. It's a special environment. And if you've never been to Plymouth and you've never played in those types of games before, it can be shell shocking. And so I would just encourage everyone out there, coaches, players, go and experience it so that when it is your time, you're prepared for the bright lights and the big stage. And I'll just leave it at that for now as kind of my synopsis of the weekend, my big takeaways there. But all right, so let's get into each one of the division championships here. Cranbrook, I mentioned, takes the Division III title. That is their 19th state championship, the most in state history. 2 state records also set in this D3 final. Glenn Green opened the scoring for EGR 12 seconds into the game. Wow, that was quite a moment there. That, according to MHSAA's website, is the fastest goal to start a championship game. Actually broke the previous record of 18 seconds, which was set by Jason Bravada in 1990. Also a West Side kid. He helped lead East Kentwood to a 5-4 win over Trenton that year. So Green and East Grand Rapids, unfortunately, not as fortunate, but it certainly wasn't for lack of effort. 55 shots on goal in that game as it went, like I said, into the third overtime. That's 9 off of the all-time record for most shots in a state final game. 64 shots was the record. Garrett Dudler, the goalie in net for Cranbrook there, his 53 saves was the second most all-time, just 5 off of Ryan Morley Stockton's record of 58 saves. That was from the iconic, classic, historic 8 overtime thriller between Orchard Lake St. Mary's and Marquette back in 2008, which I'm sure a lot of you hockey fanatics remember. But both teams that year crowned co-champions in a very bizarre, wild, unbelievable scenario that unfolded there back in 2008. So I think a lot of people, let me, before I kind of go in on Cranbrook here, a lot of people will quickly dismiss this championship run here by Cranbrook. It's a private school. Oh, they recruit and this, that, and the other, and kind of scoff. They've won more championships than anybody else, and this is just another notch on the belt. And I just don't think that could be further from the truth with this particular group, and I'll kind of expound upon that. This was the first team to enter the playoffs with a losing record and go on to win a state title in any division in at least the last 10 years. That's as far back as I could go with the Hockey Hub. They entered they entered the playoffs with an 11-13-1 record, had losses to Salem, Granville, tied Grosse Pointe South. And I know people, yeah, PD, but they played in the MIHL and that league is so tough. And it absolutely is. It's the toughest, the best league in Michigan high school hockey. But all of that, the grind of that schedule, being forced to play at a faster pace than maybe what they're comfortable with, set them up and prepared them for a championship run like this. And that's kind of what I alluded to earlier about, other teams can schedule tough opponents and avoid some of those cupcakes and avoid some of those lopsided games on your schedule. Go play a tough opponent on the road and set yourself up for you might not have success. You might really struggle in the regular season, but I'd rather see my team struggle in the regular season if it sets them up and prepares them ultimately for success down the road. So looking at this Cranbrook team, they got a solid forward in Nick Timko up front. They got a solid defenseman and Roman Seco on the back end. They got a solid goaltender, obviously, in Garrett Dudler there. But don't take this the wrong way either. But literally, only three guys on their entire team had more than 9 points in the regular season. 9 points. Like, this wasn't a star-studded, loaded Cranbrook team. And as a team, they scored more than 3 goals just twice all season. And then they did it 3 times in 5 games in the playoffs. So I mean none of this as an insult towards Cranbrook or Coach LaFontaine or any of the boys there by saying any of this. I think even they would agree to a point based on a lot of the conversations we had over the weekend where they'd even admit we didn't know we would be in this scenario a month ago playing for a state title. So I say all that because how many teams in the state have that? A stud forward, a stud D, and a stud goalie. And after that, it's just a bunch of guys who, if you can get them to buy in and accept roles and play their position and do what they need to do so that other guys can do what they need to do. Like, it's just about buying in, accepting roles, playing as a team, check your ego at the door. And ultimately, that's why this Cranbrook team had success. So I just think there's so many other teams out there in a very similar roster build, and assets at their disposal that it really could have been insert team A here as opposed to Cranbrook this year. It's just Cranbrook happened to catch that spark at the right time. Grand Rapids Catholic Central, Grand Rapids Christian, Sault Ste. Marie, Stevenson, Bay City. There's a lot of teams out there with 2 or 3 components that are really solid. And it's just about the stars aligning just right. But you know what? It made me ask the question, okay, buy-in, accepting roles, playing as a team, guys buying in. What's that look like playing as a team? Like, it's one thing, it's kind of that coach speak. And we're guilty of it, saying it to our players. You guys just got to come together as a group. Okay, coach, what does that look like? What does that mean? And it's not just some of the team building activities and some of that stuff. Like, I looked at that semifinal game against Houghton, and sure, Cranbrook got out to an early 1-0 lead. But to me, like, I knew it was over when I saw the Cranbrook bench getting hyped, fired up over forcing blue line turnovers and then getting a puck out of the zone. They knew Houghton had some big offensive threats. And I dare say Houghton's offensive had 2, 3, maybe 4 offensive threats that were bigger than any threat on Cranbrook. And it was almost like they knew that and they embraced it, right? And so every time a guy like Mikey Millette got a full head of steam through the neutral zone, and he had a chance to score. So every time a guy like Roman Seco or Wyatt Versfeld kind of negated that rush, it felt like a huge victory within the moment. So the bench is fired up. The players on the ice are fired up. Yeah, we forced a turnover. Now we're going the other way. They didn't care that they were getting outshot or outchanced or things like that because they were winning the small battles, which ultimately led to winning the big battle, obviously. Cranbrook also played desperate, right? Like I mentioned, they knew they were outgunned. But so things like back checking weren't an option. It was mandatory. Jumping on rebounds and loose pucks weren't an option. It was necessary. If you didn't do those things, Houghton was going to hand it to you. So that doesn't happen overnight, getting your team to play that desperate, getting your team to do and play that way. That was developed all season long, playing one of the toughest schedules in the state in one of the toughest conferences in the state. That was developed weeks and weeks of practice. You have to practice that way, and if you're ever going to dream of playing that way. So I'm just so hung up on this particular championship and this particular run because I believe there's 20, 30, 40 teams in the state with that same roster makeup as this Cranbrook team, which makes me then believe there's 20, 30, 40 teams capable of being in that spot if you can manage those egos, play those specific roles, buy in as a team. And again, that's all coach speak, but I kind of laid it out for you, I think, as far as what that looks like playing as a team, uh, having each other's backs, and really 20 guys pulling in the same direction for a common goal. So I just, if you're one of those mid majors, the fringe top 25 teams, you got a couple of really good cornerstone pieces on your roster. I do believe it is possible, but you just got to be disciplined. Your secondary guys have to kind of accept and embrace those roles. Not everybody on this team is going to be a goal scorer. We need guys who are going to do the dirty work, embrace that, own that role. And you just got to have a high compete level, and you got to play defense. is really um, what this Cranbrook run I thought really exemplified. So okay, that was a lot there on Cranbrook, but it was one, like I said, of all the championships this weekend, I really latched onto that one the most. Really just stood out and resonated with me. Um, so okay. Byron Center in D2. Full disclosure, this was the one game I mentioned that I did miss over the weekend. Prior obligations, just couldn't be on site for this particular game. I was there for both of the semifinals. Got a real good look at all four teams at that level. It was really good to see Byron Center and that group of seniors finish the story right after the way last year went down, and to be able to, that was a team that just you could see the way they played all season long. It was a team on a mission, a chip on their shoulders, something to prove, and that continued into the postseason. It was just a team that wasn't going to be denied. Uh, Good for them. Good for the West side, especially. First West Michigan based team to win a state title since 2011, when I believe Grand Rapids Catholic Central did it. Um, it was a team that even on an off night still found a way to get it done, and that was all season long. Now, in that semifinal game, watching that game on Thursday, I would have said, yeah, it was a bit of an off night for them. Maybe not off in the sense that it was sloppy or ugly or anything like that. It just looked like it took them a little while to settle in. Yes, the team had been there before, had been on this stage before, but I asked a lot of the guys this weekend, players who had been there before and were there currently, is there more pressure last year because it was the first time you were there, or is there more pressure this time because it's your last time, right? Both scenarios can be very stressful, high pressure, grip the stick a little too tight. And so I thought Byron Center, the way they started in that semifinal game, it looked like there were some nerves. There was maybe some concerns about the moment, and oh shit, this is what we've worked for all year, and now it's finally here, and what do we do? So it took them a little while to settle in, but once they did, obviously found their groove there, definitely into the third period of that game, and then that snowballed, and obviously they're able to go into that championship game a little more cool, calm, collected. But what I loved, I had mentioned all season long about the depth of this team. Of course, you got guys like Freusland and Pratt who have kind of been the marquee names for the team, but they don't win a state title without guys like Ben Passano. I think it's Luke Philo, McKee, Story. Those were some of the guys. Pratt and Freusland were pretty quiet, I'd say, in the semifinal. Now they went off in the championship, but they don't get to the championship if that depth scoring doesn't produce against Saginaw Heritage. I thought Heritage was actually pretty successful in making that a bit of an ugly game, a bit of a slower paced game, and they didn't really let BC play BC's style. And in the face of that adversity, in the face of not having your best night or your best performance or not being able to play your style of hockey, guys like Philo and McKee and were still able to produce and keep Byron Center in a positive position, despite the fact that maybe some other guys maybe didn't have off nights, but were slower to get going, so to speak. Um, having a secondary scoring line and almost no one gets that much quality production from their fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh options on the roster there. So I really liked Colin's story over the weekend too. He was a really steady, solid, good skater, nice footwork, flowing and moving pucks. Um, I mentioned, I think there were a lot of times there in that semifinal where BC wasn't quite at its best, but I thought he did a great job of being that steady presence, that constant for them on the back end, and great performance from him. So ultimately, there, I think a lot of that then snowballs and carries over into that championship game, and the thing about it too, I want to mention it with the Division One final. When you get to this level of the tournament, your opportunities for success are so small, so rare, and so quick that if you don't capitalize on that moment, that can ultimately be the difference. And what I mean by that is breakaways, power play opportunities, hitting a post that doesn't go in. You're only going to get a couple of those chances, and if it goes left instead of right, that could be the difference in the game. Like at this level, it really is a game of inches and a game of seconds. And I think you ultimately see that with Byron Center cashing in on 2-3 power play goals there. I think pretty early on in that one, and then you got Trenton in a really tough spot, a really tough hole that you got to dig out of, because you take a penalty here or a penalty there, and now it snowballs on you so quick. Um, I'll kind of delve into that a little bit more here with the Division One final. Uh, CC and Brighton, third straight year those two teams have played for the Division One state title. Seventh time in 12 years. It is a bit of a broken record, but it is one hell of a song. Like when those two teams get together, the place was packed to the gills on Saturday night. When they get together on this stage of all stages, it really is one of the most amazing atmospheres for hockey in this state, period, at any level, high school, college, pros. The margin for error, I'll kind of get back into that now, it is just so freaking small. Every odd man rush, every penalty, every net front scramble, the game hangs in the balance in those moments. It really does. I doubt I'd be curious to talk to some of the players about that and get candid responses, right? Talking to some of the players in the media or in the post game press conferences, you're getting some polished answers or like some of that coach speak, like I mentioned earlier. But if you could get some of those candid conversations, are the players really aware of that tension in the air? When you're out on the ice, are you even hearing the crowd chanting, or is it just kind of white noise to you as you just do what you do, right? Like I know what it's like to play in front of crowds, right? You kind of tune some of it out and muscle memory, motor skill, like you just do what you do and you're not really thinking about it. But um, being in the stands, man, you're well aware of the energy and the tension and whatnot. So that's why I'd be curious to kind of get the other side of the coin there from straight from the horse's mouth with some of those players. Um, Depth was the story all season long for CC. I feel like that obviously continued into the Final Four. I'm going to go backwards a little bit here. Against Reith's Puffer in the semis, CC's fourth line. I'll throw that in quotation marks, just because I know nobody really likes to label your lines 1, 2, 3, 4 or anything like that. Some guys color code them: blue line, black line, white line, whatever. Um, so I kind of throw that in quotation marks, and especially considering the fact that that trio of forwards is probably good enough to be, a second or top line on most programs in the state. So, that line produced, I think, three of the first four goals in that semifinal game, and then four total on the night, four of the eight that CC finished with that night. So, guys like Andrew Atala, Tyler O'Brien, these aren't the power play special teams go tos on the Shamrock squad, but they're the ones doing some of that dirty work and scoring those greasy goals in big moments. And all too often, those are the goals that win it at this level. It's not your fancy end to ends, your tic tac toe type plays. It's often a lot of the greasy, dirty goals, jamming away at the net front, or puck hits a shin guard from 20 feet out and finds the back of the net. So um, you just kind of have some of that dirty work, greasy goal type stuff from your middle and bottom of the lineup guys. But fast forward now back to the state final game, and it's Joe Curtin getting CC on the board first from the blue line. Actually came, I believe, from their second power play unit, no less, too, when you start talking about depth and things like that. Kale Rogowski then added another one early in the third period, and that really kind of was the death knell there in the game to me. But even despite all that, it was a weird dynamic because the game never felt like CC was in doubt, but it also didn't feel like Brighton was ever out of it entirely either, right? I mentioned Glenn Green set the state record for fastest goal to start a game 12 seconds into the D3 final. Just a couple hours later, Lane Petit rings one off the crossbar 10 seconds into the D1 final. And you can't help but think, if that goes in, the entire course of the game could shift. But that's kind of been the story for everyone against CC during this 4, 5, 6 year run now. Everyone looks back and says, God, if only the puck bounces this way instead of that. The margin for error is just so small. You get a breakaway, which Brighton did. You get that one-on-one look, and you don't finish. It's the game. You get a power play, rebound squirts out to you on the weak side, and you sail it over a wide open net. It's the game. You run a set face-off play, execute it to perfection, bing, bang, boom, you ring one off the crossbar. It's the game. Like, you only get 2 or 3 of those opportunities a night against a team like CC, and you have to be perfect. They force you to play that way because the second a puck hops over your stick inadvertently, you get tangled up with a guy in the corner, and the ref calls you and not them. You mishandle a rebound in front of your own net, it's over. It's over. They don't miss. So like I said, just the margin for error on both sides, whether you're trying to produce or you're trying to defend, um, you have to be perfect to up to upend that apple cart, so to speak. So so that's 5 consecutive state championships now for CC, 18 overall. Would have tied Cranbrook for the most all time, but Cranbrook obviously picked up its 19th championship earlier in the day on Saturday, so they still hold the title for most titles. Unbeaten streak now in state opponents is 64 consecutive games. De La Salle was the last Michigan-based team to beat uh, Detroit Catholic Central. That was 4-2 back on February 16th of 2022. So little streaky. The streak continues, carries on into the next season. And I know we're not doing way too early preseason polls for the 24-25 season, but if Vegas odds were out right now, obviously CC would certainly be the favorite to win what would be a 6th consecutive state title this time next year. So, okay. What are we doing on time? 35 minutes? Okay, that's not too bad. I wanted to gotta make sure I plug in my computer so we don't die. Let's do that before we get much further. All right. I'm calling this next little segment here shout out season. Shout out season. I got to give a couple shout outs here to some really cool shit I saw over the weekend. So I want to give some credit where credit is due. Shout out to the East Grand Rapids student section. Wow. For a D3 program, right? That's supposed to have small enrollment or, smaller community, whatever it may be. If we're, the divisions and teams based on enrollment and things like that, that student body, that community showed out, and not just at the Final Four, but at the state championship as well. That school, that student body showed out not once but twice on the biggest stage in Michigan high school hockey. That game on Friday, I kind of joked with Coach Chris Newton there. I was like, are they giving away extra credit for kids showing up because their game was at like 11 a.m. or 1 p.m. or something like that on Friday afternoon. So school was definitely still in session, but there was at least 100 kids, 100 East Grand Rapids kids that were not in class that day. So props to East Grand Rapids. Shout out there. That student section may have, maybe this is a hot take, but the biggest student section of the weekend. And yeah, I know everyone's going to come at me about Brighton and CC and Trenton and Cranbrook and all that, but EGR showed out in a big way. That semifinal game, I know for sure, took up two sections at USA Hockey Arena. They were loud, they were active, having fun. They brought props. There were country flags. Somebody's got to explain the country flags that were in the crowd there to me. The Irish flag, a couple others I didn't quite recognize, but they had flags. They had towels that may or may not have made their way to the ice. I will not encourage that by any stretch of the imagination. But it was cool to see some yellow, terrible towels there in the stands. I can't say enough good things about the EGR student section. That was very impressive, very cool to see, and I only hope we continue to see more of that from some of these other programs around the state, in addition to your big dogs in Brighton and CC and things like that. So shout out to the playoff beards, or at least attempt at playoff beards. A little backstory here real quick. The last couple of years, probably since I started as a coach 10, 12 years ago, I would always grow a playoff beard on behalf of the kids on the team, because you kind of laugh, 99 out of 100 high school guys can't grow a beard. They're still a couple years away from growing a beard. I would even say mine is not even that great, even now at a much older age. But I would always kind of symbolically grow it on behalf of the team, knowing that a lot of the other players were not capable of it. I do it every year, did it this year too. But a big shout out to some of the guys who tried to grow that playoff beard. And I give them a lot of credit because, like I said, when I was in high school, I know mine was not great. And I shout out to these guys for making it 3-4 weeks, however long you kind of wrote it out. Levi Pinella, Roman Seco, the Houghton boys. I saw Connor Raffelli and Mikey Millette, kind of had the mustaches going a little bit. I know it can be a bit of a tough look there in high school for 3 or 4 weeks as you're trying to, grow the playoff beard as best you can. So there was a lot of good ones out there. And so hats off to all you guys this weekend fighting the good fight and trying to sport the playoff beard. That was great to see. Shout out Garrett Dudler, goalie for Cranbrook. AAA kid, makes the jump to high school hockey and has a fantastic season. I hear it. I've heard it so many times I lose track of, AAA kids, high level AA kids saying, I'm too good to play high school. I would just tear it up, blah, blah, blah. Like, okay, if you think you're that good and you're going to come here and you're going to dominate, do it, because it works out really freaking well for the people who do. Garrett Dudler, a magical season, really put his name on the map, I think, for scouts and recruiting and people in the hockey world, this playoff run resonated not just with me, but a lot of the scouts and evaluators and other people in the building taking note of a guy basically putting his team on his back and carrying them to a state championship. 53 saves in that championship game, and honestly, looked like he could have kept going another 3 periods. I mean, he was cool, calm, collected, made some huge saves, but also just made a lot of very casual routine. Like he made it look easy a lot of times too. So that's what you want out of a goalie: make the saves you should save, and then steal a couple that maybe you shouldn't. And he did just that. Just a junior now, I think that really puts him in a good spot. Moving forward, we start talking things potentially Team Michigan. You look at next year as a senior. What does that look like? And some of the options, obviously, that Michigan high school hockey has to offer. Um, I'd be curious to ask him. You make the jump to high school hockey. Any regrets? Essentially, is kind of what I would pitch to anyone kind of on the fence or going back and forth. Glenn Green was another one kind of in that same boat. There's a lot of former AAA guys that come this way and have great success. And I challenge you. You think you'd come here and dominate? I can promise you, 9 out of 10 don't. But the ones that do come here and dominate make a name for themselves. And I think Garrett did that over the weekend. The other thing I want to mention about him too, one of the most unique, mind-boggling kind of championship celebrations I think I've ever seen in my life. Um, Cranbrook, I'm blanking on his first name. Schmidt scores the game-winning goal. Obviously, the opposite end of Dudler on the ice, and 19 guys mob Schmidt in front of the Cranbrook student section. They're going nuts. Yard sale, equipment flying everywhere. And I look down to the other end of the ice, and Garrett Dudler is still in his crease, fully suited up. All of his equipment still on. He's just kind of hunched over like this. And I mean, this celebration had been going on for 10, 15, 20 seconds. Pretty lengthy, and he was still standing in net. Like, you could tell he was just having a moment to himself. And it was just kind of inspiring to see, I'll say. And talking with him after the fact, he said he was doing just as much, having a nice little prayer, a nice little moment there to himself, with himself, before ultimately going on and celebrating with his team. So just a really, like I said, a beautiful moment, really, that I've never seen ever in sports, period. Usually, you get that moment of joy and immediately it's explosion of equipment. And he couldn't have been more calm, reserved in the moment. And then, okay, now it's time to celebrate with my teammates. And he did just that. So again, shout out Garrett Dudler, super cool moment. Shout out to Jackson Stone, Wreaths puffer forward there. Got to talk to him a little bit in the post-game press conference. First of all, for coaches and players that are on the losing side, to then be shepherded into a room and talking to big-headed media idiots like myself is not easy. I know that's a tough pill to swallow and a tough audience to face when you're obviously hoping to achieve the biggest goal in your life to that point, and then you got to come answer questions on why you came up short or why you weren't able to get it done. I know that's a tough spot to be in for anybody, especially for 17, 18-year-old kids. But Jackson was fantastic and throughout the process. Really enjoyed getting to talk with him and hear his side of things, as well as coach and Croy Clint, I believe, was the third one there as well. But Jackson, on our way out, just had a fun little moment, and I'm glad he was a good sport about it. Got into a bit of a back and forth on Twitter, and obviously you can check that out at PD's Picks. Had a bit of an exchange with someone else in the hockey community, predicting an 8-5 finish for CC and Wreaths Puffer, and I just kind of scoffed at it a little bit, and I said, if Wreaths Puffer scores 5 goals on CC, I will rip my shirt off in the press box and swing it over my head. And Jackson, uh, shout out to him just for following, being a fan, having some fun with it. He said, man, PD, I was really hoping we could score 5 goals. And so he was funny about it, had some fun with it. And I didn't say that to be dismissive towards Wreath's puffer by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously, just want to have some fun on social media, but ultimately, like, nobody has scored 5 goals on Catholic Central, and so that's why I was just trying to have some fun, maybe some make light of the situation. Obviously, didn't see it going 8-0, didn't want it to go 8-0, and ultimately, pulling for Wreath's puffer. Yeah, man, it's been a great story. Continue that story. Go get it done. Um, and yeah, so it was just a fun moment on social media. I'm glad Jackson was a good sport about it as well, and the whole Wreaths Puffer crew there, having some fun with it. And yeah, hell, I wish you would have scored 5 goals. I would have been a blast. So shout out there, Jackson Stone, for sure. Last one here. Shout out to Cranbrook's leadership group. Talking. Excuse me. Um, Doing this job, I'll say job, it's not really a job, having the opportunity, I'll phrase it that way, having the opportunity to talk with a lot of young players in the game, 14, 15, 16, 18-year olds, and talk to them about the sport, about life, about emotions and how they handle it. Like, you you get either short answers, which I'm sure mom and dad can all relate to. Hey, how was school today? It was good. What'd you do? I don't know. Like, in the media, you kind of get those same answers. Like, hey, how'd you set up that play? Well, I don't know. I just made a pass and then he put it in the net. Okay, great answer. So you don't always get the most well thought out or meaningful responses from a 15, 16-year-old kid. And it's understandable, right? Like, I know when I was that age, I probably wasn't a real wordsmith either. So, but Cranbrook's leadership group, I was blown away by them back when I saw them at the MIHL Media Day. Really, everyone at the MIHL Media Day was really impressive back in November. But Cranbrook's leadership group, I was really reminded of that, obviously, at the Final Four this weekend. And it wasn't just me. A lot of the members of the media, after they left the press room, the media room there, we all just kind of looked around and was like, "Holy shit, man! Like, that was a really well spoken group and thoughtful answers and raw and real. Like, they didn't hold back. Even at one point, they were like, "Yeah, 2 months ago, I didn't really like him, and he didn't like him, and we were at odds, and we were at each other's throats, but we just found a way to kind of get over it and come together, be a family." And so you just got some really real answers, some very well thought out answers, and very well spoken group that I can't say enough good things about, really. And I know, like I said, it's difficult for teenage kids to be that well spoken and that well thought out at such a young age. So I definitely understand it, but that's why I wanted to kind of acknowledge and shout it out for a couple that I thought really excelled and show signs of being really impressive young men with a very bright future. So very cool for them. Okay. So if you followed me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, wherever, you probably saw that I put out hypothetical NHL awards for the 23-24 high school season. Posted that article on pdspicks.com a couple days ago. Absolutely go back and check that out if you have not seen it. But I gave out hypothetical Norris Trophy award, the Selke, the Art Ross for most points and things like that. So I just had some fun with it in terms of high school hockey. Who led the state in goals? Who led the state in points? Who's the best defensive forward? Uh, who's the most gentlemanly conduct, or whatever the Lady Bing is? Had some fun with it, but there was one individual award that I didn't give out. I couldn't give out at the time because It was the MVP of the playoffs, your Conn Smythe trophy. So I wanted to do that on the podcast here live, considering that the playoffs just concluded maybe 48 hours ago. Uh, so my criteria, I mean, it's still very much the same as what the NHL does, but I think because of the structure of high school hockey, lends itself a little bit more where um, the losing teams, players from the losing teams, are a little bit more eligible uh, for Conn Smythe consideration than you would see at the NHL level. You know, at the NHL, it's a rarity for the a player on the losing team to be named the MVP of the playoffs. I don't think that's necessarily the case here at the high school level. So I do think that puts a lot of teams and players in play that wouldn't have normally been in play by NHL standards. So do I start with D3? Do I start with D1? Why don't I go D3 and I'll work my way up? I'll do that. So D3 to me, a pretty obvious selection there in Garrett Dudler. Um, Really, the moment he came into Cranbrook, I think just after the new year, really changed the entire dynamic of that team. Coach LaFontaine talked about it in one of the pressers and just how the team started to play more confidently in front of him, and knowing they had a guy like Dudler behind them, they could breathe easy a little bit or just kind of relax and do what they needed to do. And really, like I said, one guy changed the entire dynamic of that team. And now you look at the playoff run as well, and then obviously the 53 save performance there in the state championship. There really is no other selection, I think. But I will say, my guy Roman Seco, a very close second, and I say that because his performances in the semis and championship game were NHL playoffs caliber, meaning he was banged up, beat up. Pretty sure he took a puck to the throat at one point and stayed down. He got wrecked into the bench and stayed down. Like, he blocked a shot right off the laces, and like every painful scenario that could have unfolded in a hockey game ultimately happened to Roman. And oh, by the way, he had to be an every other shift guy for Cranbrook to have success against some of the offensive juggernauts that they were going up against. So Roman Seco, I'll give him a bit of another shout out there as a close second there for Conn Smythe consideration in Division Three. Okay, Division Two really could go one of two ways. I think it's a little obvious here with Byron Center. I'm gonna go Cade Pratt though, specifically um, just because of kind of how the way his career unfolded. He ended his career on a 35 game point streak. That goes all the way back to last season. Uh, of the 88 career games he's played for Byron Center, he's recorded a point in all but 15 of them. Think about that for a minute. Uh, Now, I know that's a lot more context than what should go into the Conn Smythe Trophy, right? The playoffs. But even from a playoff standpoint, 16 points in 5 games, factored in on more than half of the team's playoff goals, including 6 of the 12 goals scored in the Final Four. And I heard a bit of a unique comment there regarding Cade Pratt. My understanding, he's a football player as well. Uh, and having played both football and hockey, it's something. They're two extremely different sports, right? Like, you can play football and wrestle. They're pretty naturally. There's a lot of similar skill sets. You can play baseball and hockey. There's a lot of similar skill sets there in hand-eye coordination and things like that. You can play football and run track. But football and hockey are two completely different animals, and it is extremely hard uh, to be great at both. And I think I told this story on an earlier podcast. My freshman football coach, I believe, was a Little Caesars guy when he was a much younger kid. He was was probably in his 50s or 60s by the time he was coaching me in football. But one practice, he said, Peterson, there's football players that play hockey and hockey players that play football, but you can't be both. And he said, I've seen you play football, so I hope to God you can play hockey. So uh, it took me my 14-year-old mind a little bit to maybe process or fully understand that comment, but um, I think he was pretty much saying I wasn't very good at football. But anyways, circle back on that. Um, I heard a comment over the weekend. They really felt like Pratt was a football player that played hockey last season. And this season, it really looked like he took ownership of it and really blossomed into a hockey player, a true blue, full blown, full on hockey player. And so I just wanted to take a minute to kind of acknowledge that. And again, not that you can't do both. I'm just pointing to how difficult it can be to play football and play hockey because of such unique skill sets. And so to hear that kind of commentary, I think is a credit to maybe the off season that Cade has had, and doing things like I believe Team Michigan and the MDHL and the things out of season to help better his game and put him in a great spot this season where led his team in points and ultimately rewarded for it with the biggest championship of them all. So I just wanted to, obviously, Cade Pratt, Jackson Froisland really could go either way here. I'm going to go Cade just so I can give a little love and attention there based on some of the things I'd heard over the weekend and obviously seen for myself firsthand. So Cade Pratt, there, your Division II Conn Smythe winner. I throw that in quotation marks because I don't have any hardware to give anybody. We're talking. So Division I, okay, this is where maybe that kind of stipulation comes in. Division I, my Conn Smythe trophy goes to Cam Duffney. I know Brighton on the losing end there in the Division I championship, but I can pretty confidently say the Bulldogs don't get to that stage without Cam Duffney. 12 goals, 18 points in the playoffs. He played like a man possessed in that Division II semifinal against Clarkston. Uh, and to a degree, there were moments where he got the puck and it was like, everybody get the F out of my way. Like, I'm going to go take care of business. And not only did he kind of have that like look to him on the ice, but he ultimately produced that way as well. Both goals, picked it up, wheeled it, went end to end, and then finished with a good snipe there. Like, he just was not going to be denied. And I think you even see that at some of the earlier rounds of the playoffs to a 7-goal performance. I think at the regional level, like he played like a man possessed, a man on a mission, and at times looked gassed and exhausted. But he didn't care if they won or lost. He was going to make sure he left everything he had out there. And I think that's an absolute, credit to him and the performance he had and put on this season and in the playoffs. And didn't do it in a selfish way either, at least from my perspective. It didn't look like someone playing selfish hockey. It looked like someone who was the best player on the ice, knew he was the best player on the ice, and was going to go be the best player on the ice. And you don't see that type of special very often. So that's why I went the Cam Duffney route. Obviously, it could have went to a number of people there on CC, I think, but ultimately, um, a lot of different players playing roles there ultimately to get CC to where they were, and then ultimately win the championship. So okay, there are my Conn Smythe winners. Maybe I'll have to update that article and throw some of this info on there, so then that way we can close out our individual NHL awards for the 23-24 season. So congrats to all three champions. A very special 50th season of Michigan high school hockey. Officially in the books now. So what's next? The Coaches Association, I saw they put out the all-state selections over the weekend. Dream Team and Mr. Hockey are soon to follow over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long that process takes. I too have been working on my all freshman and all sophomore selections, as well as I'm doing juniors and seniors a little bit different here, and maybe moving forward. Doing my all freshman and all sophomore teams, maybe we'll kind of consider that like the NBA does its rising stars on All Star Weekend. How they have the rookies and sophomores play in a rising stars game. Um, I'll be putting that out, but then I'm also going to do all junior and all senior teams. I got to think of East versus West, or is it East versus West? I don't know how you guys are seeing me right now, but we'll do all junior and all senior teams East and West. So that's going to give you 40-ish juniors in total, 40-ish seniors in total. Uh, Ultimately, there's just too many high-level players uh, in these age groups for me to limit it to just a 20-man roster. So all freshmen and all sophomore rising stars rosters will be up and on the site later this week. I'll do subsequent podcasts to kind of dive into some of those names and selections on those all-star teams as selected by yours truly. It is a little bit different. This is completely separate from high school hockey, the MHSAA, the Coaches Association. It's just me and what I've seen, heard, researched myself. It'll be PD's picks, all freshmen, all sophomore, and then East and West all-star teams essentially for the juniors and the seniors. And again, I don't have anything to give out to you. Maybe at some point in the future, maybe we can get some sponsors behind it. We can send out like some cool swag or something, get some t-shirts made up or some hoodies. I don't know. We can figure something out. I'd have some fun with it. So be on the lookout for that in the coming days. Follow me on Twitter and YouTube, especially if you hit subscribe, turn notifications on so that you know as soon as I publish that information, because you don't want to miss that. Um, I put a ton of work into those all season long. It's going to be 145 players in total, assuming I don't change anything between now and publication. Uh, and I'll have snippets on each one of those kids. 58 different programs represented. So, like I said, just be on the lookout for that. So, until next time, skate hard, have fun. I'll see you at the rink soon.